Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in as an audience. You guys are a wonderful audience. And yeah, we've just been surprised that the numbers are constantly growing on the podcast. Be sure to refer the podcast to your friends and neighbors, relatives, all that sort of good stuff. Get people involved in the show so we can keep building the show and bringing you better guests and all around better performance. So go to iTunes.com or Google Play, and you can subscribe to the show there. You can also go to youtube.com/Chris Voss and hit that bell notification button so you get all the notifications for all the great shows that we do on the Chris Voss Show. I've got a wonderful guest here today, Carol McQuaid. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Carol?
It's McQuaid. You were very close.
McQuaid. Okay, I apologize for that. Carol McQuaid for the show. And Carol, tell us about yourself. I know you're an artist, but let's talk about what you do as an artist.
Sure. I'm principally a painter and a printmaker, and I do a lot of cityscapes and therefore travel a ton with my work. I teach internationally, and which gives me a unique opportunity to go around as I travel and interview guests for a podcast I do about art and artists.
Cool. So you have your own podcast for artists. What's the name of your podcast?
It's called Two Artists Walk Into a Bar.
Two artists walk into a bar.
Yeah.
Do you have some punchlines you developed off of that premise?
Well, it's really fun because I started the show with just the first half, and at the end of each episode, I ask the guests if they have a punchline or a funny story or a joke, something from their art life. And it's amazing how many people write a punchline for me. So super fun outro to the show every week. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, one of my faves was one of the first episodes. I had this awesome guest who has this great French accent. And I said, Sandrine, show's called Two Artists Walk Into a Bar. And she says, oh, yes, I have a punchline for you. Two artists walk into a bar and they must leave because they begin to draw a crowd. So it's all stuff like that.
They begin to draw a crowd. Okay, yeah, that took me a little bit. I must need some more coffee this morning. They begin to draw a crowd.
It's really, Chris.
It is for me when it comes down to it. And I'm not just keen on artist jokes. I guess I need to spend some more time in the genre to get my artist jokery topics down. So there's that. So you travel around. You're internationally recognized. I think you mentioned and awarded. You travel around and talk about art. Of course, you're a painter. I've always been impressed with the ability that creative people like yourself have, where they can take a blank sheet of paper and put something on it that's beautiful, elegant, sometimes very descriptive of whatever they're painting. If it's a painting of something, not an abstract, I guess. I have no. And the reason I appreciate it is because I have no artistic ability when it comes to drawing things and painting or anything of that nature. I can do you a really good stick figure, but even then, it's going to look awful. It's going to have wavy lines. You're just going to be like, is that a stick figure or a zombie mutant stick figure? What's going on? And so I've always had a great appreciation for people who can see design. I have a very simplistic binary thing. Maybe it's being a guy, but I know there's artistic men out there. But I just see things in black and white. I remember when I had my companies, I'd have some of the artistic employees come to work with me, and they'd be like, "How can you stand to work in this room where it's just white?" I'm like, I've never looked at the walls. I didn't know what color it was till you pointed out. We're just here to make money. And so I was interested in stuff like that, especially when it comes to business where, you go into these opulent restaurants and buildings and office settings that are beautifully designed. And you're just like, man, someone sure is an artist, because I do not have this talent. I'm nowhere near this talent. Probably never will have this talent. So I have a lot of appreciation for what you guys do.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's fun and it's different. And I find teaching, a lot of people come into a session and say exactly what you said, can't draw a stick figure, and people surprise themselves. So you never know. You might hit a point in life where you start to follow that thread and you'll be surprised by what you do.
Definitely, most definitely. So tell us some of your stories and adventures that you've been on, either with a podcast or traveling around the world.
Well, really, the podcast started because I was traveling around the world. So I just did a project this last year called the 150-day art trip, and I go and do art residencies in different places, and I teach art on the cruise ships. So I ended up with 3 art residencies and 3 cruise ship jobs that had me traveling for 150 days, and I found myself going to these like. One of the residencies was in Tuscany, one was in Mexico, one was in Sicily. And so you stay in these houses with a group of artists from all over the world, and you're all working on your own thing during the day. And then we'd get together and cook and eat and drink wine and talk at night. And it was always sitting around having these conversations with people about what we're doing and what we're thinking, how we're approaching it. And they were fascinating. And it made me think, wouldn't it be cool if people everywhere could hear these kinds of conversations? So that's sort of what led into the podcast. But the trip itself was amazing. Like, it was 5 months of living out of a suitcase and creating all kinds of art and teaching, meeting people. It was just an amazing opportunity.
That sounds like fun. Is it easy to teach people to paint, or does sometimes you just want to smack them in the face?
I think it depends on how you're approaching it. But for me, on the cruise ships, for example, they're all doing watercolor. It's something fairly simple. We are traveling to these amazing places. So, if we've just been to Athens, we sit down and we take out photos of Athens, and I paint. And I just share the running dialogue that's going in my head, and they listen, and then they go to paint. And it's actually pretty simple. I think it's surprisingly simple. It's easy to show because it's a very visual thing, and people surprise themselves. And on the cruise ship, it's people who are not necessarily, they don't think of themselves as artists. They're on a ship, and that day we're at sea. They've got nothing else to do. So instead of learning how to ballroom dance, they come hang out with me. And by the end of the cruise, they're always super emotional about what they've been able to do, and they're really proud. And it's just a great moment. It's a really fun place to teach.
Probably gives some people some ways to stretch themselves and to enjoy themselves on a vacation, get away from the norm, and maybe discover some new things about themselves that, hey, I'm an artist.
Yeah.
Honey, I'm leaving you. I went on a cruise, and now I'm an artist. So I'm out here. So it's interesting they use watercolors considering you are on a cruise. But yeah, see, if I ever did painting on a cruise ship, it would just look all wavy and all messed up, and then it'd just be like it was the ship going up and down. It looks like a Renaissance picture, but it was the ship, and you're like, ships do that.
Well, sometimes that happens. I did one in where was it? It was in Thailand last year, and it got super stormy, and people weren't even leaving their cabins. And I thought, well, there's no way there's going to be a class today. But I went up, and sure enough, all the students were there, and we'd put our little cups on the table to be able to dip our brushes in. And as the ship would heel over, the water cups would start to slide across the table, and it was a real adventure just trying to keep our stuff on. But people love it, so it's a good diversion.
Yeah, I've seen those guys that take paint and they just like throw it or something, or they have a dog walking the paint and walk across an easel or something like that. That sounds like something I'd be doing on a ship. I'd be just like, when the ship rocks, just let weird stuff happen. It's called, art. But no, it's always interesting to me when people can do art and stuff. So a lot of the people here on your podcast, they're artists. They're talking about their art. Some of the aspects around it, probably some of the great stories. I know I'm kind of an artist when it comes to being a photographer. I'm not a great photographer, but I love photography. And I've done jaunts where I go out, take a day trip, and do photography. And I think it's along the same lines of where you're going and evaluating scenery and going, let's capture this moment either in paint or in a photograph. And of course, you're trying to present it in the best light or whatever sort of I suppose atmosphere you want to present it in. And I've always appreciated the ability to look at something and try and recreate that image. and do it well. And of course, getting the right angles on what you're looking at and everything else. It's very interesting to me. And of course, some of the best stories I have and images I have are the stories behind those travels. Yeah. Where, like one of my favorite things used to be was taking a long lens, like a Canon 70-200, going down to Venice Beach. And there's a little restaurant that I would take and eat at. And I'd sit and I'd get a booth by the walkway of Venice Beach. And I would shoot down the walkway. Now, a lot of people don't like you taking photographs of them. So I'd use the long lens to shoot way down. So that people, anytime somebody started looking at me, I'd pull off. And so you just try and capture people in their natural setting, their natural habitat, if you will. And if Venice Beach has its own natural habitat when it comes down to it, it's pretty wild. Yeah. You feed the animals there. But it was always fun to me of watching and the stories that you would get from photographs you would take and trying to capture those sort of things. And some of the funnest stories I have are from taking those, or from looking over those images and going, oh yeah, there was that one guy and that thing. And so I can imagine you guys have a lot of fun with the details of your jaunts of doing art and traveling the world.
Yeah. Well, we do a lot of what you were talking about too, where there's this whole movement called urban sketching, where you sit outside, you sit in a cafe or on a ship, wherever you are, and you're drawing people and the surroundings, and it's always interesting drawing somebody there. If you look at urban sketching online, you'll see some people will just travel buses and draw the backs of people's heads or wherever they capture it. And those drawings of people just sort of not knowing they're being observed. It's there's something very intimate about them, and a lot like photography, like street photography. Yeah, and I love it.
You try and capture people. And you try to capture their essence, their soul, maybe what they're feeling. And it's interesting too, because like you say, with the street, with what you guys were doing with art, sometimes you catch people and they're in a crowd, but you can see how sometimes how maybe alone they're feeling or whatever feelings they're exhibiting, and trying to capture that moment. I think for me, it's very easy to be a photographer because boom, you take the picture once you've got everything set up, and sometimes you take a series of pictures and you find the best one that captures what story you're trying to tell or hoping to capture. But for an artist, you guys, it takes longer for you guys to capture something and to put it down. Do you have to be really good at keeping an image in your head of what you saw, or do you have to be in front of that image for a long time, or what are the challenges that you run into in capturing a moving image or an image that's not sitting for you, say like in what you mentioned in your urban captures?
Right. So it really depends on what you're doing. If I'm out painting in the wild, I sit in a place and I'll be trying to capture the general sense of a place. So if somebody's sitting there, or if a car is there and it moves and another one takes its place, the piece ends up being sort of a melange of all the different things that have gone through that space. Kind of captures a broader moment. If I'm at home painting in my studio, I a lot of times will be working from a sketch like that. And while I'm doing it, I'm taking photographs repeatedly. So I can go through the photographs, pick out my favorite elements, look at the sketch, and that sort of informs how I felt at that time. And all of those things get threaded together to make the bigger studio piece. So yeah, there's some photography involved. There's some sketching involved. There's a lot of memory involved. I find whatever I was listening to at the time, if I'm listening to music, that triggers the memory and gets me back in that space.
Do you sometimes use music where you play music that is motivating you or keeping you in like the emotional moment of what you're trying to capture?
Totally. When I do residencies, I make playlists based on my experience in that place. And then when I'm doing the work from those trips, I'm listening to that. So I have residencies from Assisi and all these different places that are absolutely like that. It gets infused, and it gets so infused in the work that if I paint something, I can look at it 10 years later and I'll know what I was listening to when I painted it.
That's a very interesting. I do the same thing with my dogs, especially my dogs that have passed on. And sometimes when I'll edit photos in Lightroom, I'll take in, sometimes I'll be spending hours trying to find the right, the way, just the whole right way to edit the photo and to embellish it in the way that I want. And sometimes I use music or whatever the mood is that I had. It's kind of surrounding the photo or my memory of the photo. To help keep me in that emotional moment, to kind of help search for the best sort of way to filter and edit. Maybe sometimes I want to go black and white. Maybe sometimes I want to go color. Sometimes black and white's a really great way to capture an image and to really define it. And sometimes that really makes an image pop, sometimes based on the color of your subject and, of course, the color of some of the ambiance of the photo, its surroundings, background, etc. And so it's interesting to me the different artists, artistry way. And I suppose I paint in some sort of format of edit when it comes to Lightroom, when it comes to photograph, because I'm putting different colors to it and doing different things with the contrast and trying to find the right sort of, I guess the people from Instagram would just say filter. Which isn't that simple in Lightroom. In fact, there's a lot of times I walk away after a couple hours of Lightroom and I go, I just can't find the emotional core or the center of this photograph. I just can't figure out a way to make it work. Yeah. I grew up as a kid indoctrinated in a cult, of religious cult, a really strong religious cult. And they taught us that nudity was evil and, sex was bad if it was for reproduction, and just the most horrible repressive stuff you can imagine when it comes to just the human body and the naturalization of the human experience. And I was lucky enough that in my neighborhood, there was an artist who lived in my neighborhood, and his name was actually Art, which was kind of ironic.
Easy to remember.
And I used to go up to his place, and we used to play in his yard. He had this giant, massive, just beautiful yard, multiple buildings. He was a very successful artist. I don't know how successful that was on a scale of artists, but he was obviously successful with what he did. And he was a sculptor, and he would sculpt women. And he would do nudes of women, sculpt them, and he'd do these beautiful bronze works of art that were just amazing. And I remember when I first went up to his studio, and I think we used to play in his yard, and I think he used to pay me to mow his lawn. I think that's how I got to know him, as I was mowing his lawn or something. We used to play in his yard. It was really nice. And I remember going to his studio and seeing these images of naked women that were bronzed. There were bronze statues that he'd made. And I remember going, oh, well, my mommy told me that's bad. And he explained to me the beauty of humanity, the beauty of being nude, and that it isn't a nasty thing. It is a perversion. It's an appreciation for the natural beauty of being human. And that there's nothing bad about it. There's nothing, he even really told me, he goes, this isn't a sexual thing. This is a appreciation of art. And that's where I really got my first indoctrination about what art really was. This is long before I went to, I think, junior high. I think I took an art class that you had to take. And it really helped me appreciate the other information I've gotten, and moving away from that and really realizing that, hey, that was my first experience of seeing, I'd never seen the Statue of David and other nude art pieces that are very famous. And so I'd never been exposed to any of that. And whatever exposure I had, it was probably told that it was, that's bad. I wasn't allowed to watch MASH because MASH had too many sexual innuendos. It was a perverted show. Three's Company was like might as well have been an X-rated show on our TV. Mm-hmm. And so since then, I've always had a really good appreciation of art and the fact that people can draw things and do things, and really what the core value of art is in appreciating it. And sadly, a lot of people still take certain types of art as a perversion, but appreciating that as an artist, and seeing what you guys do, even though I can't be a artist, but I have an appreciation. I guess that's what I'm trying to say when it comes down to it.
Yeah, well, good. That's that must have just totally opened up your world, discovering that.
It did. I kind of knew the cult was bullshit, but that was one of the first early cracks where I was like, there is a whole other world here, and it's not about perversion or sexuality. It's I mean, I suppose in some way, doing a bronze of a woman who's naked, I mean, that is in a form of a slight sexuality, but I mean, that is the human experience when it comes down to it in reality. Yeah. So what are your favorite things to paint? What do you like to paint?
I'm known as a cityscape painter. So I do a lot of like just the chaos of being in a city. I do, the cars and the people and signage and a lot of times I paint it, but a lot of times I do it in a printmaking method where I will, I'll draw it and then I'll take that image and I'll carve it into a piece of wood. And some of these are like 9 feet long. They're full panoramics. And then I roll that piece of wood or linoleum, whatever it is, with ink, lay paper on it, and I hand transfer it. So then it becomes, it's an original, but you can repeat it. And so some of these images, when they come up, they're black and white. And then I'll take them and I'll paint them. And it's a very traditional method. But the way I do it is it's modernized because they're big urban city centers.
Wow.
And super chaosy and really fun.
This is another reason I'm not an artist, because I'm freaking lazy. That sounds like a lot of work. Amazing. I mean, you carve the wood and then you do the overlay. Yeah. Wow. So where's the website we can check out some of these pieces of art?
To see my art, you would go to carolmcquaidart.com. And that's the same. My Instagram and Facebook is at Carol McQuaid Art, and it's McQuaid. It's McQuaid. To see the podcast, you go to twoartistswalkintoabar.com. Or on social media, it's at 2 Artists Podcast.
That should be awesome. That should be awesome. I'm going to check out some of this art because I'm really interested to see, how this comes out with you overlay that. Cityscapes are interesting. Like I say, when I used to do Venice Beach, that was one of my favorite places to go and people watch and shoot. And I just have some really funny photographs. And yeah, you're right. There's a lot of chaos. There's just always an interesting group of people, especially in larger cities. And I really thought about, what you use a good word there, chaos. And I really thought about that really is a lot of information overload when you go into big cities, when you really think about it. I can't imagine someone coming from, some little town in Kansas going to the big city for the first time. I remember when I went to the big city for the first time, actually, it was overwhelming, but it was exciting and thrilling all at the same time. And I suppose if you can capture that in your art pieces, that's got to be great.
Yeah. And for me, I grew up just outside of the city, Vancouver, Canada. And when my dad would take me into the city, I'd be in the back seat of the car and we'd head in and I would be looking out the windows and seeing these, neon signs go by and sometimes we'd be there late coming back at night and it would be all the lights and it just totally, I was like, oh my God, this is where I want to be. And I think that's really a big part of why I do the pieces I do. Yeah, which is funny because now I live part-time in the city, but the rest of the time I'm up in this little mountain hideaway in the middle of nowhere. There's not a human in sight other than the people that are here with me. And so we live part-time on a mountaintop. We live part-time on a beach down in Mexico. And so when I go to the city, it's like I'm here to work and I love it. Like I just want to absorb as much of the crazy chaos as I can.
Definitely. I was going to ask you if you're Canadian, your boot was giving you away. I love my Canadian friends, and it's either a boot or a that will give them away. Usually a boot. And yeah, Canada's a beautiful country. I'm a big Rush fan, so I
oh, right on. That was my first concert ever, was Rush.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to give away which concert that was? We might be both giving away our ages by
I'm not
Rush
saying
fans.
nothing.
Okay. All right. All right. It was the last album. Yeah. Art 40. Sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah. I've been a Rush fan all my life, and one of these days I got to get up to Canada and toodaloo around some of the famous sites from some of their albums and stuff. Although I guess Neil Peart moved down here to California, so he's no longer Canadian, eh?
Yeah. You're speaking my language.
A in there. Yeah. I think we watched Bob and Doug McKenzie, the movie, about, I don't know, 1,000 times as teenagers or something.
Yeah.
We're really fascinated with the funniness in that movie. And of course, I was a Rush fan before that. But is it hard to travel the world and be an artist, or do you just have to find the right gigs, or how does someone become a traveling international artist? I suppose I'm sure there's somebody in my audience who's wondering that.
Yeah, no, and it is finding the opportunities is a huge part of being an artist in general, and finding places where you can show, finding things to get involved in. Sort of the nature of our work. We're in a studio. We're focused on in a very, we've got a pretty narrow focus. We're working on something super intensely, and it's really to be a professional artist, and especially to be a traveling artist, you need to shift back and forth between studio time and searching for opportunities time, applying for things, being involved in your community. And that's a lot of the message of the podcast, actually, is as an artist, figuring out how to find those opportunities, figuring out how to find your community, and knowing what things there are to apply for. It's all, we are, like most self-employed people, you're continuously recreating your career, and you're continuously finding your next gig, your next client, your next show. And it's a huge part of the excitement. But there are a lot of very talented artists out there who don't sell their work because they're in their studio and that's where their focus is. And to really make a career of it, you need that balance between the two. So yeah. So finding the international gigs, a lot of it is doing residencies is a huge part of it. And so they are usually anywhere from a few weeks to a year, and you find them, you write to them, you show them what you do, you explain what you want to come there and do, and they give you a place to stay in a studio, and you go and do a new body of work. And that's been, for me, when I started doing those, that was really a turning point in my career. It gave me visibility, it gave me new subject matter. And more than anything, it gave me all this contact with other working artists. We could swap secrets and ideas and support each other. And that's a huge part of how I grew my career.
Yeah. I was just looking over my sleeping puppy, my 4-month-old sleeping puppy.
Yeah.
And I've realized that she's not peeing on my floor. She's making art puddles.
She's very talented.
and maybe instead of cleaning that up, I should start taking photographs. And I can make me a puppy art pee puddle book. And there might be some art there. That could be a National Endowment of the Arts thing.
Yeah.
But no, that was just a comedic piece. I'm not peeing on the floor, Dad. I'm giving you art.
Yeah. What is that? What is it to you?
I'm pretty sure that she thinks it's art. In fact, I think everything that she's chewed up of mine and destroyed, she thinks is, look, Dad, I made your phone better with art.
She's a sculptor at heart.
Yeah, she's a sculptor at heart. That's really what she's doing. She's not just chewing my legs of my dining room table. She's sculpting. That's what it is. She's carving an art piece, and someday I'll look at that and probably cry. So there's that. So I don't know what to do with that, but there it is. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in, and give us your plugs once again, so that people can check you out, Carol.
So the website is carolmcquaidart.com, and on social media, it's at Carol McQuaid Art, and it's CarolMcQuaid. And the podcast is twoartistswalkintoabar.com, and on social media, it is at 2artistspodcast.
Sounds good. Sounds good. And thanks to our audience for tuning in. We certainly appreciate you guys coming by the show. Be sure to refer it to your friends and relatives, neighbors, dogs, cats, mistresses, pool boys. Go to iTunes, Google Play, and also youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.